Mr. B's history. Now then, people, today, if you can hold your excitement, is a number one in a series of 8. Yes, 8. There's going to be 7 more after this. How can you contain your excitement? I would suggest you get a cup of tea, strap in, and let's go. So what we're going to explore in this video and 7 others are the main factors that help medicine develop from the year 1000 through to the present day. Okay, as you know, many of my videos are designed to help GCSE history students in general, but those specifically studying AQA history. So there's a section, a longitudinal study, there's a big word, i.e. a long period of time, on health and the people. And the big 16 marker is about a factors question. You will need to assess the importance of a named factor and at least one other in a way it helped or hindered medicine in some sense. And when I say some sense, it might be disease, it might be medicine, it might be surgery. You'll need to read the question, people. Okay, and you will have to know about up to 7 factors. Now, I hear you cry, which ones do I have to revise? Well, I'll come back to that when we look at the 8th and last video, but essentially you have to look a bit at all of them. And not only must you consider the named factor and one other, which could be either war or individuals, superstition and religion, chance, government, communication, science and technology, you also have to talk about at least 2 different periods of history. And as I'm sure you've all memorized and taken to your hearts because it's so dear to you, it's either medicine stands still, beginnings of change, revolution and modern stuff. Okay, and again, the 8th video in this section, I know it's hard, by the time you get to the 8th you may be beyond help, but the 8th video will really go through in detail how to answer these questions. The first 7 are going to look at the other factors, the individual factors. But then you would need to work out which one is going to be the most important, and you can do that by looking at, are there links between factors? Does one thing help cause another? But for me personally and crucially, which development helped most people for the longest period of time? So I hope you find that useful. We shall now move on to a particular factor. I apologize in advance, but rather than have to pay lots of copyright, I'm going to have to sing to you. As Edwin Starr famously said in the late 60s, early 70s, war, huh, what is it good for? Well, shall we find out? How has war affected the treatment of people in Britain? Okay, remember, it's health and the nation, the people of Britain. I want you to bear that in mind as we go on our voyage through time looking at medicine. So the first section in terms of time periods we're going to look at is medicine stands still, which is between the year 1000 and 1500. Now, some of you, most of you, almost all of you won't have a clue who this person is. You might need to ask your parents or more likely your grandparents. This is a picture of a 1970s magician called Paul Daniels. And one of his catchphrases, you'll like this, not a lot, but you will. And so I've put Paul up here because actually not a lot happens in terms of medical developments for the people in terms of war. However, some things do happen. So the battlefield surgery developed. So John Bradmore, you can see a little picture from his original description, designed a tool that would remove an arrowhead from the face of the future Henry V. Very, very painful operation to, if you like, screw something into his cheekbone and then grab hold of the arrow and pull it out. He survived, but if you look at lots of the portraits of Henry V, they only show him side on with his good side and not the massive scarred side. The other main battlefield war development was the idea and development from the 1400s onwards of something called the wound man. It was a guidebook for barber surgeons and others on how to treat different wounds, knife wounds, increasingly bullet wounds, but also unusual things like spider bite 20. And if you had to treat someone with a spider bite, look at the picture, I need to go to page 20 and it will tell me what to do. So, impact, remember, it's about how's it made a difference? Well, very, very limited. In the 1300s, it's been estimated that there were less than 100 trained doctors and surgeons in the entirety of England. Yes, there were people like John Bradmore, but you had to pay for them if you could afford them. So impact on health of the people, minimal. So the second time period is the beginnings of change. Things start moving, the clue's in the title, folks, and I thought I'd put the first signs of spring up, the snowdrop. So what snowdrops can we expect to see in war and medicine from 1500 onwards? Well, this chap here, Ambrose Paré, a barber surgeon who took part as a surgeon in campaigns for over 30 years and was also surgeon too for French kings. He was famous for a whole series of things, mainly to do with amputation and treatment thereof. So what did Ambrose do? Well, by chance, he came across a discovery of how to treat wounds when there's been an amputation. Traditionally, hot oil or even tar was applied to the wound. And although this did help some patients, it also killed a lot of others from shock and the heat. But he ran out, in the middle of a battle, he ran out of this hot oil and he developed his own mixture of egg yolks, rose oil and turpentine. Notice, no heat applied. And what he found in the morning after he treated people, after a really restless night worrying if he'd just made some terrible mistake, he found that those people he'd treated with his new potion had survived and the leg was a lot less angry and the people were in a lot less pain. Obviously some pain because they've just had a limb amputated without anaesthetic. But those who'd been treated previously with the traditional hot oil and tar method, many of them had died, many of them were in a very bad way. So chance discovery during wartime. Thank you, Ambrose. But he also went on to design a range of artificial limbs for people. Obviously, you've had your leg cut off, you've had an arm amputated, you've had a hand amputated. Then he designed things so people could allegedly be able to pick up knives or forks and even hold a sword fight. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It sounds a bit like hyperbole to me. He designed a way or discovered a way of, after the limb had been amputated, to clamp the blood vessels and tie them off with really fine pieces of thread called ligatures to stop blood seeping and people dying of blood loss. One of the things I didn't mention is the reason why you've got all these new techniques is because you've got a new way of killing and hurting people. You've got cannonballs, you've got early guns, and these things with the soft lead shot of a musket ball are ripping limbs apart in a way that perhaps some swords wouldn't have done previously. So new technology, new way of hurting people. Paré comes up with new ways of trying to sort them out. And he's an author and communicator. He wrote lots and lots of books. One of them called Methods of Curing Wounds, which is a useful book as a medical practitioner on the battlefield. And modestly, or perhaps not, he said, I have published this apology. Apology in a way is a summary of all the things he'd learned, that all men may know. That's probably all people who could read Latin and who could afford a book. So, beginnings of change, these snowdrops. Has it made a much difference to people in Britain? Probably not. There was some progress clearly, but until people could access more healthcare, it wasn't going to make that much of a difference. Okay, we're moving on now, people. We're looking at a revolution in medicine. No, not that sort of revolution, but revolution in terms of rapid and important medical discoveries that help a lot of people. You've come across Lister and Simpson, no doubt, in your studies. We're going to look at something different. One of the things that gets me really cross about the AQA history syllabus, as far as medicine's concerned, and many other aspects, is where are the women? Women made significant contributions in a whole range of areas, yet the AQA syllabus is deafeningly silent about it. Come on, AQA, pull your finger out. Anyway, we're going to right that wrong, people. Together, we're going to storm the barricades of male domination. A little bit, anyway. So here she is, Florence Nightingale. You may have heard of her. You may have heard of she's a lady with the lamp, but she's done so much more. So she and 38 other nurses, Florence was in charge, went to the Crimean War to work in hospitals there. And she focused on clean hospitals, good sanitation, clean bedding, clean dressings, reasonable diet. And just by cleaning things, she managed to reduce death rates from infections and infectious diseases from 40% to 2%. Even though she didn't know about germs because it was too early and she thought it was all miasmatic. But the war was over and she continued to make significant, perhaps even more significant contributions to medical care for many people. But I would argue that the war made her famous, gave her contacts in the government and enabled her to have influence over and above perhaps any other female in the medical profession to date. So she turned nursing into a medical profession. She wrote How to Be a Good Nurse, Notes on Nursing, and she set up the world's first nursing school in 1860 at St Thomas's Hospital in London. And similar nursing schools were set up all around the world. But beyond that, she also designed hospitals, so-called pavilion system. This is a picture of a pavilion children's hospital she designed in Lisbon, Portugal. You have long wards. So if there is an infectious outbreak, it's only going to be in one ward, not in the entire hospital. She believed in lots of light and lots of air, more miasma. Interestingly, as a side note, she does have in her hospitals a very prominent chapel because she was a very religious person. In fact, she took up the idea of nursing and helping people when she was on a trip in Europe, and she said God spoke to her and told her to do it. But she also promoted a detailed statistical understanding of medical care. If you like pie charts, you're going to love these. Florence made something called Rose diagrams, and in these diagrams what she's doing is showing when people died of what. And the one on the right is the year before all her innovations set up, lots, and the blue is people who die from infections. And you'll notice that on the top left picture, the blue sections are much smaller. That's because of the impact of her cleaning the hospitals. So Florence Nightingale, not just a woman, a lady with a lamp, but someone who made a big difference. And as an example of that, when she died in 1910, the New York Times talked about her being setting in motion a force which led to thousands of women to devote themselves to systematic care and sick and wounded. So she was not just someone who helped some soldiers in a short-lived but brutal war in the Crimean, but she had a lasting impact about medical care, about the nursing profession, about the building of hospitals worldwide. Not a bad effort. Why isn't she in syllabus, AQA? Shame. So you would assume, with all this evidence that Florence Nightingale has so carefully presented and the developments in nursing and hospital design, that surely the British government would have learnt its lesson on how to make sure that soldiers did not die unnecessarily of disease and infection. And there is one short answer to that: no, they didn't. So in the Boer War, from 1899 to 1902, the background picture to this actually is a picture before the battle of a place called the Spine Kop in South Africa. So all of you who are football fans wondered where those unusual names came from. Well, it came from this war. But no, did they learn the lessons? No. Am I being clear enough? No. In the Boer War, 6,000 British troops died from weapons injuries. 160,000, yes, you heard that right, 160,000 died from disease. So clearly, by the end of this time period of revolution in medicine, lessons had not been learnt. Shame. Okay, so we're moving into the fourth time period, modern medicine, from 1900 towards the present day. And we're going to look at really two subsections. That one is the First World War, when a lot of things happened. So lessons clearly had been learnt from the Boer War, when there'd been 5% take up on typhoid vaccinations. Statistical studies suggest that up to 90% of British soldiers had been vaccinated against typhoid before the outbreak of the war or during the war. Made a big difference. But some of the things that changed and developed and improved, which people built on later, was this idea of getting people treated quickly and efficiently in the best place possible. And so they had a chain of evacuation. So when someone was injured on the battlefield, stretcher bearers would take them to a casualty station. If they could be treated and that was enough, that was fine, but otherwise they'd be taken to different stages. They'd go to a casualty clearing station. Then if they were still beyond the capabilities of that place, they might go on a train and be taken off to a base hospital. And so there was rapid diagnosis and treatment as far as possible. Big improvement. X-ray machine, Marie Curie, the famous scientist. Oh, another woman making a big difference. Hurrah. Sponsored and drove little X-ray machines, so-called petit curé. And it's been estimated that well over 1 million X-rays were taken of soldiers with different bits of metal in their bodies, which enabled them to be treated more effectively. So thank you, Marie. Fractures. One of the most debilitating and dangerous fractures a body can have is if you have a fractured femur, a fractured thigh bone, because that can lead to, because the muscles are so big in the thigh, it can lead to any broken bone being pulled through the skin by the muscle going into shock, which isn't good. But there was originally a death rate of about 80% if you had a fractured femur. However, something called a Thomas splint, which is still used today, which puts the leg under tension, reduced that from 80% to 15%. Then there were blood transfusions. Blood types had been identified in 1901, but the problem was that when you took blood from someone to use it in another patient, blood does something called clotting, and that's really useful when you want to stop yourself bleeding, but it's not very useful when you want to keep liquid blood to use on someone else. So they developed and discovered the use of sodium citrate. Don't know what that is, not a chemist. It's got something to do with sodium. And that stopped blood clotting. Blood banks were set up ready, so there was blood ready for people to use if necessary. And transfusions began in the spring of 1917. So blood transfusions, another development. However, once all these bombs and shells exploded, there were bits of hot flying metal going everywhere. And this had the effect of causing horrific injuries to people. Not life-threatening, but horrific. So much so that many thousands of people were hideously disfigured. And here comes one of the unsung heroes, or until recently he's just had a book written about him. Harold Gillies, conducted 11,000 operations on about 5,000 patients, where he reconstructed people's faces. Where a shell or piece of shrapnel had left a hole in the face, he tried his best to fix it. And then finally, there was the early beginnings of psychological treatments, what we might call PTSD today, post-traumatic stress disorder. People in those days called shell shock, the involuntary movement caused by the incessant bombardment. And so that was started to be treated, with an estimation of about 80,000 British soldiers suffering from that. Now, if I'm going to be personal for a minute, back in the mid-90s, I had quite a nasty ice climbing accident. On my arm, and I got evacuated from the climb by the guide I was with. I got taken by ambulance to a doctor's and then to hospital. Chain of evacuation. I had an X-ray on my arm where the nurse kindly told me my arm was bone soup. So I had fractures which were repaired. During the operation, I was given a blood transfusion. At the end of the operation, because the arm had quite a big hole in it, there was a little bit of plastic surgery going on so that the arm would look more normal and be covered up. I never had any psychological treatment. So on a personal basis, these developments that occurred in World War I are things that I have taken advantage of and needed much in my lifetime. However, can the same be said for people in 1900? So, did they make a difference? Yes, hurrah! The First World War was the first major conflict in which fewer soldiers died from disease than from enemy fire. You'll remember the Boer War had 6,000 casualties as a result of fighting, 160,000 from disease. The First World War, more people died, unfortunately, from wounds than from disease. So it made a big difference. Now, let's move on. Let's go on to modern medicine. World War II, second bit. Thanks to penicillin. That might be a clue. So, the developments that occurred in World War I, the blood transfusion, the chain of evacuation, plastic surgery, all of those continued and were better because they had been refined and practiced and improved. In fact, there were some examples in World War II of the first attempts at heart surgery to remove shrapnel from a beating heart, usually with some success. The big thing was penicillin. As we've seen in history, many people die of infection rather than the actual wound. But penicillin largely put an end to that during World War II. And it's thanks to World War II that governments finally started investing in large-scale manufacture of penicillin, because Florian Chain, who tried to develop penicillin as a medicine based on the scientific work of Sir Alexander Fleming, they only ever managed to produce enough penicillin to nearly save one person who had got an infection from a rose thorn. And that poor chap died because they ran out of penicillin, didn't have enough to treat him. But by 1944, thanks to the war and the efforts, 2.3 million doses of penicillin escorted the D-Day landings. Big difference. Also, if you think about health and the people, what you've got is that rationing led to a better understanding of nutrition, and health improved as a result of this better diet. So although it wasn't just about the soldiers, at home as well, some people were having, for the first time, a semi-healthy diet. And also during the war, William Beveridge's report in 1942 outlined a comprehensive and free at point of delivery health system, which we would call the National Health Service. So during the war, the government realised that they would have to and should recognise the sacrifice of thousands of soldiers and service personnel and make sure that they were cared for when they got back. So on the previous slide, when I talked about all those treatments I received when I had my climbing injury in the 90s, I could not have afforded that in 1900. There was no NHS. If I'd had that accident in 1900, I am fairly certain that I would die. Possibly blood loss, probably infection. But World War II, penicillin making a big difference. Better health. NHS, the big thing. Okay, so war as the main factor. Remember, this is the exciting number one of a series of 8 people. Can I have some sort of conclusion? We've started with Wound Man and we've ended up in a way with mass production of penicillin. I think that's the big word, mass production. And the signposting of the National Health Service. So I would suggest, humbly, that particularly since the 1850s, war has been a major reason why medical developments improved rapidly, saving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, military personnel's lives. Most of these developments, however, were only available for the fortunate few who could afford them. It was not until after World War II and the establishment of the NHS by the Attlee government in 1948 that these medical treatments were widely available for everyone. However, the NHS itself was inspired by wartime and Beveridge Report. So significant improvements, mainly from about 1850s onwards, when you've got Florence Nightingale, cleanliness, hospitals, nursing professionalisation around the world. And then you've got war with blood transfusions, with fractures, with casualty evacuation and penicillin and the birth of the NHS. All very important stuff. So, Edwin, I'm sorry. When you said war, what is it good for? Actually, it turns out quite a lot. Okay, final thing, people. Yet another not very short video from Mr. B. I do apologise, but you need to know the stuff, people. If you have any suggestions or questions or improvements, either drop me a comment or email me at mrbshistory1832@gmail.com. Please be constructive. Yes, these could be quicker, but I think there is something called a stop button on video. So if you need to try and take a break from my dulcet tones and my singing, then you're welcome to do that. Hope you find that useful. Remember, another 7 to come. Marvellous.